Will you ever truly belong in your adopted country? It's the question every expat asks themselves, and the one Sarah Turnbull's memoir, Almost French, tried to answer. I'm Susie, I'm American, and I've lived here in Dijon, France since 2008. After 17 years in France, I thought I'd have this figured out. But this book articulated feelings I still struggle to articulate, and issues I still struggle to understand. Whether you're considering a move abroad, already an expat, or just fascinated by French culture, Sarah Turnbull's insights from her 2002 book remain surprisingly relevant, and I'll explain why. Today, I'll share what resonated with me most, what I feel like has changed since her Paris days, and why, even after 17 years, I might just still be almost French myself. But before we dive in, I just wanted to let you know that if you click on the link in the video description below, you can sign up for my email list where I share practical information about life in France. Almost French follows Australian journalist Sarah Turnbull, who meets a Frenchman during her travels and impulsively accepts his invitation to visit Paris. That 1 month visit turns into a permanent stay despite her having, quote, no job, no friends, and barely speaking the language. The memoir chronicles her cultural adaptation challenges, from unwritten social codes to language barriers, to even fashion expectations. According to her boyfriend, it's a cultural crime to wear sweatpants to the bakery. This is kind of news to me. I wore my pajama pants to the market on Thursday, but one of the big differences is that she lives in Paris and I live in Dijon. What makes this book really compelling is Turnbull's ability to capture those moments where you're thinking to yourself, am I crazy, or is this entire country operating by a rule book that I just don't have access to? My copy of this book is all beat up because I ordered it used on Vinted, but it just arrived last Tuesday and I started reading it and I literally couldn't put it down, and I had finished it by Wednesday, the next day. I feel like it was because the author was able to articulate observations that she's had that I've also had, but that I have struggled to articulate. Reading the book felt for me like having a long, entertaining, insightful conversation with a friend that just kind of gets you. Plus, it was fun to kind of go back in time and read her observations about just arriving in France, because for me, that seems like it was so long ago, but on the other hand, as she says as well, it seems like it was just yesterday. And even if your situation differs from hers or mine, reading about these experiences can either help to prepare you for what's ahead or comfort you and reassure you that you're not alone. All right, so let's start with the topics of the book that resonated the most, and we'll start with language and identity. Turnbull perfectly captures the frustration of the early stages of the language acquisition journey. That frustration with sounding like a toddler despite having complex thoughts in your head that you're trying to express. She said, quote, I fizz with frustration at my inability to communicate. It was as though in trying to express myself in another language, I'd suddenly plunged 50 IQ points. I also commiserated with her phone anxiety. She said that she was terrified of the telephone. For years, I too would feel a surge of panic when the telephone would ring or when I would have to make a phone call to make a doctor's appointment or a restaurant reservation, for example. And in terms of cultural belonging, she says, quote, my identity in my new homeland is defined by my country of origin. And, quote, in some ways, living in France has made me feel more Australian. This rings really true to me. Before moving to France, I don't think I ever really considered myself particularly American, but that is definitely how I get labeled a lot here. But she also says, quote, in France, I may stand out as foreign, but in Australia, I feel a bit foreign too. And it's true that this sort of in-between kind of becomes your new normal over time. She says, quote, such is the nature of expatriate life. Betwixt and between was how one Paris-based American writer described having two homelands. Stripped of romance, perhaps that's what being an expat is all about, a sense of not wholly belonging. After 6 years in France, I felt like an insider. Having a French partner is a huge help, of course, but at the same time, I'm still an outsider. To be a true insider, you need that historical superglue spun from things like French childhood friends and memories of school holidays on the grandparents' farm and centuries of accumulated culture and complications. That passage resonated with me deeply. After 17 years, I still feel that insider-outsider dichotomy. One moment, France can really feel like home, and then the next moment, I'm perplexed and feel like I'm just a perpetual visitor again. The author says, quote, "No one has ever said I look French before. In France, I'm used to standing out as foreign." And, quote, "How do people know I'm not French if I haven't said anything?" And her boyfriend responds, quote, "Because you look Anglo-Saxon." That made me laugh because I feel the same way. I feel like despite wearing glasses I bought in France and clothes I bought in France and having a haircut that I got in France and carrying around my French ID card, no one has ever mistaken me for French either. Usually they can identify me as foreign the moment I open my mouth. Even the term Anglo-Saxon, the fact that her boyfriend calls her that and that she picks up on it and starts using it throughout the book, also made me chuckle. The French use this term Anglo-Saxon to group a lot of us English speakers together: Canadian, American, British, Australian. And in addition to having a common language, apparently we're also supposed to have some common personality traits as well. And what's really funny is that over time I've noticed that I too have started to use this term, whereas I think before moving to France I never would have labeled myself as Anglo-Saxon. There were some other things that made me laugh about how she thinks that she gets identified as being foreign. For one thing, she says that she likes to have beer for an aperitif, and I totally agree. I'm in the same boat. Despite living in one of the world's best wine regions, I also enjoy having a beer for an aperitif sometimes. And then she also feels self-conscious about her laugh that she thinks is too loud compared to the other people in her entourage. And I feel exactly the same way. Sometimes I'll catch myself cackling in public and think, oh my goodness, I am by far the loudest person in this group. A lot of this book is spent deciphering social codes, specifically in dinner party settings. And she says it's because dinner parties are the main ways of entertaining in France, which I tend to agree with. And she talks about the fact that there's a certain ceremony throughout the course of a meal, from the aperitif to the dessert, which I have also observed over the time that I've been living here as well. Her observations about Anglo-Saxon politeness versus French directness were funny as well. She says, quote, "There is a culture of criticism in France that means that people don't hold back from telling you when something is bad." And it's true. She's referring to people who give you constructive criticism when they're tasting your food, something that you've prepared for them. And I think this is mainly close friends and family who are trying to give you feedback about how you could improve the dish for the next time that you make it. I don't think it's mean-spirited at all, but it is different than just saying, "Oh yeah, it's great, don't change anything." They are trying to help you make it better for the next time. But then this is contrasted with the French ability to be more abstract than us, perhaps, with their arguments. Turnbull said that she would read an article in the newspaper and be, quote, "still unsure of the writer's position." "What's the point exactly?" I'd ask Frederic, perplexed, because I can't help feeling it's all a bit abstract. Exasperated by my Anglo-Saxon simplicity, he reminds me that the point was to explore the range of possibilities. And in terms of communication style, Sarah Turnbull also pinpoints a big difference when she says, quote, "The French are bad at small talk with people they've just met. In a country where discretion is highly valued, asking personal questions, including what someone does for a living and whether they have children, may be considered inappropriate and sometimes rude. Even at dinners with good friends, the conversation remains remarkably impersonal." It's funny because I definitely feel like I noticed this at first as well. Like I would spend an entire evening with a group of people and feel like by the end of the night that nobody had actually asked me any personal questions about myself. But I don't necessarily think that this means that the French are, quote, bad at small talk. I think it's just a different style. And I don't necessarily agree with her that even with close friends that the topics stay on this level. I think that once you really become friends with people, that's when you can open up to them and discuss more personal topics. In any case, that's been my experience. Sarah Turnbull and I share an appreciation for the physical beauty of our adopted homeland as well. She writes admiringly of Paris, quote, "Without fail, I'm struck by the heart-stopping beauty of Paris. You'd think that the shock would wear off, that seeing it would no longer have the power to leave you wordless. I can't quite believe I don't have to pay to come here, that now I can simply walk out my front door and savor such places in private moments. It seems pure indulgence." I feel similarly enamored of my adopted hometown, Dijon. How could I not? But there are definitely some things that have changed since 2002. For one thing, I think that technology has really changed the expat experience. It's so much easier for us to stay in touch with friends and family now, which is great. And also, poor Sarah, she is traipsing around Paris trying to get all of her administrative paperwork taken care of. And while that may still be partially the case for many people, a lot of the bureaucratic processes have moved online, which doesn't make it any less frustrating at times, but it just means that I think a lot of the time we spend less time physically waiting in line in different offices. And oh my goodness, the bikes in Paris. There's this whole passage when she's talking about a transportation strike from 1995, where she basically says how the city was paralyzed. She says, quote, "There are no buses running, no metro. Short of walking 2 hours, I have no way of getting into the city center." Bikes are ubiquitous in Paris now. There's been so much development in terms of bike infrastructure. She mentions at one point buying some rollerblades to try to get around, but she never even mentions bicycles. So that's another big change that I noticed. And in terms of eating habits, something that she said also made me chuckle. She said, quote, "Vegetable lasagna is hardly likely to be a hit in a country of carnivores." She said this at one point when she was considering what to make, I think, for friends or family that were coming over to her house for a meal. And it made me chuckle because I'm more or less a vegetarian myself. And oftentimes when we have guests over, we don't make any meat. We only have vegetarian options as well. And I definitely don't get the impression that people are disappointed or expecting to be served meat. Being a vegetarian can be a bit tricky at times, but I also think that it's becoming more widely accepted here. In fact, there's a part at the end of the book where she's talking about food shopping in her neighborhood in Paris and how she goes from the cheese shop to the butcher. And she's talking about the fact that she often passes by a horse meat butcher and she wonders how long it's going to stay open. And when I read that passage, I thought in my mind, there's no way that place is still open. I just don't know anyone who eats horse meat anymore. And I looked online and it has in fact closed. There may still be other horse meat butchers in Paris, but I can't think of any, for example, here in Dijon. I just don't think that that's something that people commonly eat these days anymore. In fact, I've noticed that the people that I know who eat meat seem to be eating less and less meat, in fact. There are parts of the book that I did not connect with as much, and I think a lot of it may have to do with the fact that the book takes place in Paris and I live in Dijon. So I've never experienced any sort of drama with judgmental Parisian women, for example. And in fact, my social integration here into Dijon has been more or less smooth, I would say. And definitely a lot less dramatic. There's a part in the prologue where she says, quote, "The social code I discovered in France wasn't just different from my Australian one, it was diametrically opposed to it. For a long time, I couldn't fathom the French, and to be fair, they couldn't fathom me either. During my first year, dinner parties turned into tearful trials. There I was, a confident 28-year-old with the confidence knocked out of me, spending cheese courses locked in somebody's loo, mascara streaming down my cheeks." Her stories definitely make for entertainment, and I feel bad for her if she really was that upset. And I've definitely been in my share of awkward social situations, but never to the point of crying in someone's bathroom during the cheese course. I think the most unconventional thing I've ever done during a cheese course is left the table to go take a nap. But my arrival in France was quite different than Sarah's, and I think that that does make, in fact, it does make a big difference. Sarah came to France after having just met her boyfriend during her travels in Europe, and she spoke a little bit of French but had never lived here before, whereas I studied French in college, spent a semester here, came to work here in France after I graduated, and had a love of the French language and the French culture before ever having met my husband. So my impression is that it's different when you move to a country for a romantic relationship as opposed to moving to a country for the love and appreciation of the country itself. It was probably more challenging for her than it was for me. She didn't have that foundational knowledge of the language and the culture when she arrived. And when things got challenging in her relationship, I imagine she would ask herself more quickly, what am I doing here? Whereas for me, I always had this appreciation for France, French culture, and the French language. Anyway, what really struck me about this book is how the acculturation process never really ends. Sarah Turnbull wrote this book after being in France for 6 years. I've been here for 17 years and I still feel just almost French. So I would absolutely recommend this book, Almost French, with the caveat that it is about Paris at a specific time in the late 90s, but it's still wonderful and contains lots of really insightful observations about French culture and life here in France. And for anyone who is thinking about moving to France, or if you are here already, it also does a good job articulating the emotional journey and the challenges of moving to a new country, moving to France in particular. Even if it is maybe a little dramatic at times, it's still definitely an entertaining and fascinating read. So I'm curious to know which aspects of French culture you think it would be the most challenging to adapt to. Language barriers, social codes, communication styles, administrative and bureaucratic issues. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you've read Almost French before, I would love to know what you thought. Please let me know in the comments below. Remember to sign up for my email list by clicking the link in the video description below for more practical information about life in France. I also have lots of videos here on my channel about my life in France that you can check out. And make sure to subscribe because the next book I think I'm going to be talking about is this one, The Bonjour Effect, The Secret Codes of French Conversation Revealed. I've never read this before and I thought the topic was intriguing as well. So thank you so much for watching today, and until the next time, à bientôt!